Hey everyone, so today for you guys I wanted to film a first impressions on the brand new Urban Decay Electric palette. I want to start off by apologizing if there's any glare with my glasses right now. I really needed to take a break from the contacts and I just got this palette, so I really wanted to film this video and I really didn't feel like going in, putting in contacts, and then I'm not really wearing much for makeup today, so then having to do that all and I was like So anyway, I'm sorry if there's glare, hopefully it won't be too bad. Also, I just painted my nails so they look a little bit rough around the cuticles, but let's just try to ignore those things and move on to the palette here. So I just, like I said, picked this up today from Sephora. I was doing like a little bit of retail therapy shopping, and when I called Sephora and asked them when they would be getting this in, they told me not for another few weeks. So I know that it's been online, but I was a little bit disappointed because my Sephora right now is renovating, so they weren't planning on getting it in until after the renovation, and I don't know, I was really sad about that because they're doing that 15% off VIB sale right now, so I was like, this would be a perfect time to pick this up, which is also why I wanted to film this, so that if you are wanting this, you can kind of watch this, maybe get a better idea on whether it's something you would like to buy or not, and then pick it up during the sale. So anyway, it comes in a box like this, literally just a box that's identical to the packaging. The first thing that I love about this palette is just the packaging of it. I mean, the colors on the outside, it's such a visually pretty palette. It's got this kind of like colorful smoke kind of design. Super pretty. I love the feeling of it. It's got a nice weight to it without being too heavy. It's like this nice kind of hard, it feels like a durable kind of plastic, if that makes sense. And then the thing that I probably love most is this magnetic closure here. It's like the perfect magnetic closure because it's not like the Stila palettes where the magnetic closure is really weak. This has a nice strong magnetic closure, but it's not one of those palettes that you feel like you're having to like dig your nail into to try to get open. It lifts up very easily with just, you know, the pat of your finger. So then you open it up and you have a large mirror. Another bonus to this palette is that this mirror can stand up by itself. So if you are traveling or something, or if you're using this, like for me, I really like palettes that have this design because when I do tutorials, it's nice to be able to have the palette here and be able to look at it and adjust the mirror depending on what I'm doing, and it will stand straight. So that's kind of a huge plus. Large mirror, it covers the entire surface area of the palette here, and there's my little viewfinder. And these are the colors. I'm going to try to see if I can turn it just so that the mirror doesn't get too much in the way. So here are what the colors look like. I will also take out this brush and show you guys it real quick. So this here is the brush, and overall I must say that I'm not too, I don't know, thrilled with it, to be honest. I think that they could have done better with the brush. I think that the purple looks kind of cheap. I don't know, Wet n Wild recently released new brushes that are colored like this, and I just find that these kind of look like 99-cent brushes. This first brush here, it doesn't have a whole lot of fluffiness to it. It's just sort of like your standard eyeshadow brush. However, it's kind of squared on the ends here, which I think is really weird. I don't really think that that is very, like, I don't know, ergonomically designed to fit like the contours of your eye very well. And then on the other side, I just don't know what you're supposed to do with this. It's kind of like this really thin, sort of like a smudger brush, I guess, but it's so thin, and the bristles are soft, but this thing is like just so thin that you can't really get a whole lot of smudging going on like your lower lash line. The only thing that I can really think to use this for is like liner, or I don't know, I sort of had this idea it'd be a good like brow brush because the thing is so thin if you're looking at it there dead on. So not really thrilled with the brush. I think some of the brushes that Urban Decay comes out with in their palettes are really nice, but this is just one that I probably won't use too much. But onto the actual palette, because I'm sure that that's what you guys want to actually know about, not the brush. So here is a look at the palette. Looking at it just straight on, it's very scary. You have lots of bright colors, most of which I would say are in the kind of bluey, purpley kind of tone. You only have a few sort of warmer tones. Slow Burn right here is like this really pretty burnt orange, and then Savage is kind of like this bright pink. Those are kind of warm toned. Jilted down here is sort of like a warm pinky purple, but other than that you have a lot of the greeny bluey tones going on. And I actually watched X Sparkage's review on this when it first, you know, was released to like different bloggers and stuff a really long time ago, about a month ago I guess, not too long ago. But she also mentioned how she wishes that there were more of like these warmer colors within the palette, because then you could do a mix of like warm and cool cool toned, colorful eye looks, and I totally agree with her. We'll get onto swatches later, but I think a color that they easily could have taken out would either be Revolt, which is like a shimmery silver. I don't really think that that's necessary. It doesn't really fit the whole theme of the palette very well. So, and I take this with a grain of salt, but Chaos. Chaos is a beautiful, bright, marine, kind of matte blue shade. This was originally released in the Urban Decay Vice palette, and what inspired this whole palette was this shade, and people saying I want more of this shade. I mean, Urban Decay was first founded on being a colorful makeup kind of cosmetic company. But anyway, as time went on, they kind of developed more into a neutral brand with the release of all the Naked palettes, the Naked finishing powders, the Naked lipstick, the Naked lip glosses. I mean, they kind of turned into this everyday kind of makeup brand and sort of pulled away from this really bright, colorful theme. So I'm so happy they're going back to it. Apparently, people are saying they want more like Chaos, and I just feel like if people are saying they want more like Chaos, I don't think that that necessarily means that they need more Chaos. I already have the Vice palette, so I could have done without Chaos because I already have it in a different palette, and I feel like most people who said they wanted this probably already have it, so you're kind of getting a duplication of the color. It's like the way they promote like Half-Baked in almost every single one of their palettes, even in like the Naked 1 to Naked 2. People don't need that much of that color. You can have one and you're okay, and I think this would have been so cool if they came out with all new colors and they would have replaced this, and they would have done something in sort of that warm family, maybe like a bright matte yellow, or I think a coral would have been really, really pretty to throw in this. But regardless, this is what it looks like. Let's move on to the swatches. So the first color here is Revolt, and this is like a really pretty, like I said, iridescent silver shade. It's a little bit flaky. It's not like the most smooth and the most pigmented shade. Like I said, it works best as like an overlay to the shadows. So if I was to do a swatch there on my hand, you can see we are not getting tons of pigment out of this. It's definitely like a sheer shade, but it works well as like an overlay. Like I said, I don't think it's a necessity to the palette. Could have done without it, and I don't know. It's alright though, and I think it would be pretty over the rest of these shades. Next shade here is Gonzo, and this is probably the color that I am most disappointed by because when you swatch it on your finger, it looks pretty. I would describe it as a matte mid-tone teal shade. However, when you then go to apply it to the skin, it's very, again, I don't know, it's very sheer. You can kind of see there's not a whole lot of pigment coming out of this. This is one of the shades from the palette that would definitely, you know, do a lot better if you had a white base underneath it. So not one of my favorites, especially considering that as we go through the rest of the palette, it's very pigmented. The next shadow we have here is Slow Burn, and this is one of my favorites. It's a beautiful burnt orange with what Urban Decay calls their floating pearl, which is what makes these, when you first are kind of just looking at them, matte shades, a little bit more smooth, not as chalky, and a lot more blendable. And there is Slow Burn on my hand, so as you can see, lots and lots of pigment coming out of this. You don't really get a whole lot of that floating pearl once it's on. It just looks like a nice matte burnt orange. Super, super pretty. Really, really intense. Moving on here, the next shade that we have is Savage, and this is a beautiful hot pink. It's a little bit more chalky than the rest of those shades. It's a little bit powdery, but it's still very pigmented. You can see here when I put it on my hand, it's not as smooth as Slow Burn. It definitely has a little bit more of that Gonzo texture to it, but it still is very pretty, and I still think it has a slightly better texture to Gonzo. I just think that it's a little bit more pigmented. Moving on here to one of my favorite shades again, this is called Fringe. This seems to be a very popular shade in this palette. It's this beautiful, it's got one of those kind of Urban Decay's signature finishes, I would call it. It's one of those kind of highly shimmery, really kind of metallic finishes, and it's just a beautiful like tealy blue. It's a very, very complex shade. It's definitely like a teal shade, but it's got just, I mean, such a beautiful metallicness to it. So there it is on the bottom of my hand. As you can see, compared to Gonzo, it's definitely much more of a deeper teal, and I just think it's a lot more complex, and it's definitely one of the like better shades in this palette because it does have that signature Urban Decay finish, so it's very smooth, very creamy, and super pigmented. Moving on to the bottom row, this first shade we have here is Chaos, and as I mentioned before, it was originally released in this Vice palette. It's a beautiful matte mid-tone marine blue. This definitely is one of the shades that has the best texture in the entire palette. It almost feels like a cream when you're rubbing your fingers on it. It is just absolutely beautiful. Like I said again, I mean, it's not the end of the world that they threw it in. I can honestly see why they did, but as somebody who already owns Chaos, I would have liked to see a different shade, but it still is a beautiful shade and very, very creamy and smooth. And there is what it looks like swatched on my hand. Kind of one of those shades, again, where if you put a base under it, it really, really pops. I did a tutorial with the shade like ages and ages ago, about a year ago. And it is beautiful, but if you put a base underneath it, it really does pop a lot more. It's just such a matte shade that it is a little bit sheer. Moving on here, another one of my favorite shades. This is called Jilted, and this is a beautiful pinky purple, really, really intense color. And it's sort of got like this metallic-iness to it, where in the light it looks a little bit lighter, and then it definitely recedes as you move into like more of the shadowy area. So if you were to throw this on the lid, it would be one of those colors that really kind of receded in the crease, popped on the lid. It is gorgeous. I absolutely love this shade. It's very similar in texture to Fringe and Slow Burn. So there's a look of it on my hand. Not a shade you really need a base with. It's just very, very pigmented, soft and creamy. Next shade we have here is Urban, and I'm so excited that Urban Decay finally came out with a purple shadow called Urban, because purple is the signature Urban Decay color, and this is like dead on to that color. Super pretty. I would describe it as like a dark shimmery purple without being too dark. It's definitely purple. It's not one of those colors that's like a dark purple that almost leans like black or brown. It's very intense, very creamy and smooth, just the same in texture as Fringe, Slow Burn, and Jilted. And there's a look of it on my hand. Super pretty, really creamy, beautiful color. Next color we have here is Freak, and this is an intense lime green. It is so pretty. It kind of reminds me of Chaos almost in texture. It's very creamy. It has a similar finish to the colors like Fringe, Jilted, Urban. However, it's a lot more creamier than those shadows for some reason. So anyway, there's that. And there's a look of that shade on my hand. Very pigmented, super pretty, grassy lime green. Finally, the last color we have is Thrash, and this is sort of like a yellow. I would call it kind of a greenish yellow. It's not straight up yellow. It definitely has a little bit of a greeny undertone to it. It's a beautiful shade. Like, this is such a fun, bright, kind of like summery shade. As far as the texture goes, I would compare it to Slow Burn. And there's a look at that on my hand. You can really see more of those greeny tones coming out there. Such a pretty shade. Not a shade you would need a base with. Very beautiful and smooth and pigmented. Alright, so finally here are some up close swatches. Here is the first row of the palette and then the second row. So overall, I think this palette is just gorgeous. I mean, the textures are pretty good. They're not consistent within the entire palette. Like I said, some are creamier than others, some need a base while others don't. Overall, with these shadows, I would recommend putting on some type of a white base, especially because the colors that are anywhere in the purpley family, so Urban, Jilted, Slow Burn, and Savage, they are not recommended for use on the immediate eye area. Now, keep in mind that everywhere else in the country that is not the case. They are able to sell this without that warning label on the back, but the FDA has not regulated that kind of a red dye to be put around the eye area in cosmetics. So take it with a grain of salt, I think, because if they can sell it everywhere else in the world, I think that you'll be okay. Just, you know, try them on your eye, and if you have a bad reaction, then obviously keep them to the cheeks or do something else with them. I think that you could definitely use Savage and Slow Burn as blushes if you just did it very lightly. So that would be a way to get use out of those colors. As far as Urban and Jilted, I mean, those are two colors that really I can only think about those going on the eyes. I don't know what else you would ever do with those if you're like a regular kind of everyday user. So if you do have problems with red pigment around, you know, your face and stuff, this would be a palette that honestly I would skip, because 4 out of the 10 shades are useless to you, and I just think that that's a really bad deal. I don't think that it's a perfect palette. There are definite things that could be tweaked about it. For example, I would change the brush, maybe do a tiny little different layout with the colors, and some of the colors are not as pigmented as I would love them to be, and some really do require the need for a base, and I feel like for $50, maybe they shouldn't, but overall, I think that the colors are really gorgeous. I don't mind putting a base underneath them if it means making them more pigmented. That doesn't bother me at all, and it's a palette that I do see myself getting a lot of use out of as we go into summer, especially right now since I've been going through like a color phase. I can really see myself using this palette a lot. So overall, I think that it's really pretty. I would recommend it to you guys as sort of just like my first impression kind of thing going on here. So I will be doing some tutorials with this, so stay tuned for that. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.